Interior Department solicitor's memo told the president that monuments proposed by the president do not require NEPA because NEPA compliance does not cover presidential action. So in August of 1995, that was a year before the Clinton re-elect, there was a series of memos that went through asking President Clinton to do something for his re-election campaign to, and now I quote, to help overcome the negative views towards Clinton, a designation of a new monument would create a compelling reason to enthusiastically support the administration. The idea of taking place in Utah was, once again I quote from internal memos, opposition would come from those who in candor are unlikely to support the administration under any circumstance. So in 1992, Mr. Clinton had finished third in Utah behind both Bush and Ross Perot. So it was obviously, this was easy pickings. In March 19th of 1996, that was the election year. Once again, memos went through there, and there was, coming from CEQ to the White House, a letter that needed to be signed because it had to look as if the president initiated this, not CEQ, not the Interior Department, so you could avoid NEPA compliance. If, and I'm quoting again, if the alleged letter only asked for information about Utah, it looked biased, but asked for a broader review, and it would have been clear that there are more compelling areas for designation than Utah parks. In fact, a week later, in another memo, they said these lands are not really endangered, which is one of the criteria for using the Antiquities Act. Then they also had, another week later, coming from OMB as well as CEQ, another report saying that Grand Canyon National Recreation Area, because McKinty and others may want to rope in Caparowitz and Escalante canyons, these regions, if the package ultimately doesn't seem adequate. I would mention that what they're talking about adding later on to the package that they initially require is what this bill would be designating as a national park. As late as July of 29th of 1996, the CEQ and OMB were worried because a letter had not been signed. They once again sent another memo to the White House saying a letter does not have to be sent, but must be proposed and signed ASAP. In August of that same year, another memo went to the White House, resigned to having to wait because the chief of staff at that time, Leon Panetta, wanted time to talk to Western Democrats before they actually signed and introduced anything. On September 9th, news reports came leaking out in the Washington Post and other areas that a monument was going to be designated. On September 9th, the CEQ then told the Utah delegation that no decision had been made. Secretary Babbitt told Senators Hatch and Bennett and Congressman Hansen that no decision had been made. On the 14th, they once again said, I can tell you categorically no decision has been made with respect to this. 3 days later, in a phone call to Senator Bennett, the White House said, oh no, we deny these news reports. Anybody who says that this is going to happen does not know what he is talking about. No decision has been made. On September 9th, that story is what Governor Leavitt finally called the White House to try and find out the truth behind that story. That's the situation of how Grand Staircase-Escalante was originally established, as a politically motivated area that was not necessarily in need of protection. In fact, other areas were in greater need, and it was added simply to try and get enthusiasm to election in a state that wasn't going to vote for Clinton regardless. I yield back my time, and I welcome the guests who are here. I appreciate listening to your testimony.
Thank you. And if there are no other questions, the chair now recognizes the former governor of the state of Utah, the Honorable Mike Leavitt, who's come to us today from Salt Lake City, Utah.
Chairman Bishop, Subcommittee Chairman McClintock, and Ranking Member Hanabusa.
You need to turn your mic on.
It's on. I'll just have to speak more directly into it. I want to thank you for the invitation to appear. I've been asked to recount the history of the way in which the Grand Staircase came forward, at least from my perspective as governor at the time. Grand Staircase, as has been spoken of already, was done in stealth. It happened under wraps. It was done on the fly. There was no consultation done with any state, county, or local leaders of Utah, our federal office holders, or our people. None. Worse, there was a deliberate effort made to conceal and to keep the monument planning process out of view. Secrecy was so vital a concern to this endeavor that the administration was denying the decision had been made, even as bleachers were being assembled on the north rim of the Grand Canyon for an event. The obsessive secrecy was documented multiple times. Once in a letter from the Interior Department, Solicitor John Leslie wrote, and I'm quoting, "I can't emphasize confidentiality too much. If word leaks out, it probably won't happen, so take care." The need for secrecy was reinforced in a memo from the Council on Environmental Quality Director, Kathleen McGinty. She said to another White House colleague that one stated that, and I'm quoting here, "Any public release of information will probably foreclose the president's option to proceed." President Clinton announced the creation of the monument on September the 18th, 1996. The first reports came out 11 days earlier, not from a public announcement, not from an announcement or an entry into the Federal Registry, but a news leak that's been referenced in the Washington Post. I recounted in my written testimony of days of calls and inquiries by me, by members of the federal delegation, and many others to every level of the executive branch. I was told by the Secretary of Interior directly that his department was not involved and suggested I call the White House, which I did. I was told at the White House that they weren't certain where that report in the Washington Post came from. I asked for a meeting with the President or the Chief of Staff. I was finally granted one on September the 17th, the day before the announcement. At the same time, as I suggested, the government of the United States was denying the plan. They had White House advance people on the north rim of the Grand Canyon preparing for the event. At 1:58 a.m. in the morning, on the day it was announced, I finally received a call from the President. The President was gracious, but he said to me, "I am just now beginning to review this matter." I was back in Salt Lake City by that time, by the time the announcement was actually made on the north rim of the Grand Canyon in Arizona, not in Utah. This was a piece of land equal in size to the state of Rhode Island, the state of Delaware, and the District of Columbia combined. This is not the way public lands decisions should or were ever intended to be made. In 1976, the nation made an important public policy decision we all know as FLPMA, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. It requires great deliberation and careful process in determining how public lands should be used. Our system of government was constructed to prevent one person from having that much power. I'd like to assert three foundational issues. One, there was land within the boundaries of the Grand Staircase that needed protection, but the President's order went way beyond that which was necessary or prudent. And second, the secrecy and the circumstances surrounding the monument's creation amounted to abuse of power, process, and protocol, so egregious that it's offensive to the concept of democracy itself. And finally, while this hearing does not consider the ongoing nature of the Antiquities Act, Congress needs to refine it to prevent ongoing misuse. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your testimony. The chair is now pleased to recognize the Honorable Leland Pollock, Chairman of the Board of Commissioners of Garfield County, Utah, that comes to us today from Panguitch, Utah. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning. My name is Leland Pollock. I'm a Garfield County Commissioner. I'm also a lifetime resident of Garfield County. One of the best places on this planet is Garfield County. And very frankly, I'm tired of all of the propaganda. 21 years of stories about the Grand Staircase that are not true. So I'm glad that you all are giving me an opportunity to come back here and tell the truth. And anybody today that doesn't believe what I have to say, come on out. I'll take you around. It'll take us, I mean, they've said 1.7 million acres. It's about 2 million acres. You know, after all the state trust lands and everything was consumed by this process within the boundaries of the Grand Staircase, you're talking 2 million acres of land. Now, Garfield County, to put this into perspective, is the size of Connecticut. 93% of my county is federal land, 3.5% state, 3.5% private, okay? So from a county perspective, and if you've ever tried to do taxes and try to collect revenue, just put that into perspective how hard it would be to manage a county. But that's not the point. The point of the matter is there's been negative impacts. Number one, school enrollment in the little town of Escalante prior to the Grand Staircase, 150 children, 7th through 12th grade. 150. That was the school enrollment. Congressman Stewart brought up the state of emergency. We didn't make that up. The county commissioners didn't do that. We did that at the request of the school district because the school enrollment numbers had dropped to 51 children, 7th through 12th grade. Now, everybody here that's listening knows how hard that would be to educate 51 children, 7th through 12th grade. So if all of this economic benefit that has been talked about is true, why did the school enrollment drop? Well, number one, it's pretty obvious all the traditional uses of all that land was taken away from us. Now, I'd like to make another point. Probably 20% of that monument is visited. I don't doubt that. I applaud the fact that you're trying to do something with that, say 20%. But 80% of a land mass like that, if you don't believe me, come on out. We'll go out, and a lot of it, the roads have been closed, but it is just BLM rangeland like you'll find anywhere in the western United States. And I'm sorry, people are not going to travel from all over the world to look at sagebrush and regular BLM rangeland. There's no tourism value. Why is that the case? Because it was tied up for political reasons. It was tied up to stop coal mining. It was tied up to limit and prohibit the grazing, traditional grazing practices. Now, as far as grazing goes, there's been a story that no AUMs have been cut, annual unit months. Animals on the ground basically is what it is. That's not true. Those AUMs have been suspended. That means you can't run them on the land. Now, why have they been suspended? Because we have not been able to do actual range recovery projects. We haven't been able to maintain the land. Now, Western land, 1934, that's the Taylor Grazing Act. That's what created the BLM, the way I understand it, was created to do recovery projects. Now, on all this BLM land that is still BLM monument, there have been no recovery projects. Water sources have dried up. That doesn't just hurt cattle. That hurts mule deer, bighorn sheep. It hurts the land. Soil erosion problems, all kinds of invasive weed problems, pinyon and juniper encroachment. Western land has to be maintained. I'm sorry. I know there's radical environmentalists, so-called environmentalists, that say, oh no, just leave it alone. You can't do that with BLM land. That's why the BLM was created. So in closing, I applaud this effort, and I just ask you, please look at all the facts. Don't get wound up about political agendas. Just look at the facts. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you for your testimony.